Hello, everyone. We are back for this last segment of this first day of main conferences at Apidays. And I will be the MC, especially for this track. Jennifer will be on the other track, because it's a specific track about this book, Continuous API Management, second edition. You can see in purple the first edition in the background. And we have gathered the 4 co-authors, me included, to actually present you some chapters and some element of the book. And the first one will be Ronnie Mitra. Ronnie Mitra will join us. Hello, Ronnie. How are you?
Hey, Mehdi. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. Unfortunately, it's virtual yet, but for next one, it will be live. And yes, you prepared for us something about continuous API governance, right?
I think that's right. Yeah, let's see if that's true. Here we go. Does that look good?
Yes. Can you put full screen somewhere?
Let me try that again.
Yeah, you can try again. We still see that. Yeah, we still see the PPT like a frame. That's weird, but. Yeah, we see a black screen, but then it goes back to non-full screen.
Let's try something else. So screen sharing. Any tips, Mehdi, on the best way to do this?
Maybe like a PDF, like quick PDF, and then and then full screen and PDF.
Okay, I'm gonna do it the way I do it sometimes with clients. Let's try this.
Or you can share your screen, not just the app, but the screen, full screen, and then you go full screen.
Yep, that's what we're gonna try.
So you can see the tabs. Yeah,
any better?
We see just the desk here. We just see like the mountain, the wallpaper.
Yeah. We're getting closer, don't worry.
Yeah, black is coming.
Coming. Okay, now we're gonna try this. So the talk I'm gonna give is about how to share your screen. And the challenge is when you have 2 screens, it's difficult. But through a process of iteration,
it heads and tails.
Test and learn.
Perfect. Yeah. That's good. We just see. Can you just remove the? Can you just remove the you're sharing your? Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Let's go for 20 minutes running. 20, 25 minutes.
20 minutes. All right.
Yeah, 20.
Starting now.
Bye.
All right. Thank you so much, and apologies for that. It's always a challenge, as you know. I think the title in the schedule is something like Continuous Governance Management Performance something. But really, I just wanted to talk to you about APIs and governance. I work in this company called Publicis Sapient. And to tell you the truth, a lot of the talks I do nowadays are presentations. They're very purposeful, right? Like I'm trying to achieve some kind of a goal, whether that is explaining something or selling something or helping a client come to a decision. But that's not really, for me, what I like to do with Apidays. So what I wanted to do here was just maybe give you some thoughts about governance. So if you'll allow me, we can explore, right? What does it mean to talk about API governance? Years ago, that's mostly what I did, is have a chance to think about things and talk about things. And that's the group I was in the API Academy with Mehdi and with Eric and Mike and a few others. And back in 2018, we wrote this book, which, if you're paying attention, is the theme of this track here, with each of us doing a small session on parts of the book. This is the cover from the first edition. One of the interesting things about that time in 2018 was when we were deciding on the title of this, we talked about, should this be called API governance? And the consensus we had was no, because at that time in 2018, governance was really a bad word. And what I mean by that is there's connotations of using the word governance, to the point that there was another book I wrote on microservices architecture, and that had the word governance inside of the book. And there was this visceral reaction from the initial reviewers, because around this time, if you remember, we're just starting to get our feet in the space of microservices. So people are really enthusiastic about autonomy, having the freedom to make choices, right? And the connotation of governance is very top down. When we think of governance, we think of corporate governance, policies and rules, and people who say no. So if you open the book, you'll find that we do talk a little bit about API governance as a chapter, but it wasn't something we were going to put on the cover. We'll come back to this idea in a moment. In 2018, I was in the API Academy. Today, I'm in this other company because the API Academy no longer exists. We've all gone off into the wind and planted ourselves in different places. I find myself in this digital business transformation consultancy, and I'm working with these amazing people. And now the APIs are just one part of what we do, right, as a company. This is a organization that can take a really big company and transform them. And to do that kind of transformation, you have to have people who understand business strategy, management consulting, user experience, product design, service design, data architecture, cloud infrastructure, all of these parts, right? So it's amazing to have this shift where now my work is primarily the hard, dirty work of making change happen, right? So previously, at the time we wrote that first edition, it was much more about the ideal of what APIs could be. What's the ideal of continuous API management? And now my world and my mind is primarily focused on, what are the realities of trying to make change? One of the things I get to do in my job is speak to very senior leaders in technology organizations. And it's interesting because they have a really high level view, right? That when they talk about what they want to do, it's really at a big scale. So when I talk with them, I might talk in terms of forces and the kinds of organization they want to be, right? And I'm sure you're having similar insights and similar discussions in your own companies as well, right? We know there's a few forces that are predominant at the moment. We know that the consumer patterns are changing like crazy. And this doesn't mean that everyone is using computers more, right? Or that everyone is using their phone. There's a volatility here. This data from McKinsey is interesting. Digital adoption by industry is showing that there's actually a decline in digital adoption in the grocery industry. And the theory is that coming out of COVID, people are more interested in face-to-face grocery potentially, right? Rather than order to their door. What all that volatility does is it drives the need for businesses to be able to change their experiences really quickly. So they have to move quickly and be in the places customers expect. And we kind of know that, right? As an industry, we've been perceiving that. The second big force is the crazy growth of startups. If you're familiar with this idea of a unicorn, it's a startup that has achieved 1 billion in valuation. Here's some data from Crunchbase that shows the number of unicorns just growing like crazy. And what happens is as these startups start to become big and they get all this funding, is that they unbundle existing companies and organizations. So they take pieces of something that a big company is doing well, and they are able to do it really well themselves in a focused way. And then everything becomes rebundled into some other big company. That's creating all kinds of churn for large organizations. They have to figure out which companies they should be using as part of their supply and how they're going to reach customers now that whole way that the customer experience is developed starts to get fractured and unbundled and rebundled. And then finally, there's this pressure on talent, which I think all of us are facing. Companies are increasingly becoming more digital, which means there's a increased demand for more and better talent, but supply is not equally increasing. So at the leadership level, if you're steering a big global company or a large bank or big insurance company or a big retailer, you're seeing these forces and you know there's a different kind of organization that you want to become. Right? And it exhibits these qualities. It's more composable. You want to be able to take the capabilities or things you can do and rearrange them easily. So you can address that volatility in the space so that you can create local offerings and global offerings without a lot of effort. Right? There's always a push for automation and digitization. Talent shortages are making that even more important, right? Leaders are looking for ways that they can not just get faster, but reduce the operating costs and ownership costs of the businesses they run. And with all of the volatility and the need to move fast, this pressure to make better decisions faster is increasing. And what most leaders are recognizing is that to make better, faster decisions, they need better data and faster feedback. So we're seeing real pressure to become a company that has great insight and great observability. And then finally, there's this awareness that the organizational structure matters, but not only from a business perspective, but in terms of with the tech, right? So this thing we've been talking about in conferences like this about, Conway's law and alignment is really just getting normalized. And everyone is recognizing that things need to be aligned. I don't think it's a controversial slide, right? I think most people would nod their heads. They'd say, yeah, this is the kind of company we want to become. So this should be the future. The problem is most of these companies can't get there, right? Because they already exist, because they're already big, because they have these blockers. So they know where they want to be, right? And at the C level, at the executive level, they set the direction. But then when you get down to the ground level of the people who are trying to work, there are all these blockers that are preventing them from achieving the ambition, right? There's tons of technical debt. So as we start to plan something big, we get mired in this challenge of the things we thought we would solve later. There's always legacy systems, and the definition of legacy keeps changing, of course, right? As time moves forward, legacy swallows up more and more technologies. There's also legacy structures, right? So the way an organization is designed might have been optimal for the problems of 10 or 15 years ago, but maybe not the problems of today. And then finally, there's this idea of risk and risk aversion. The truth is that for most of the big companies that I deal with personally, it's not that they're not making profit, right? If a company was in trouble, then reinventing themselves into this thing on the right is probably easier because there's a sense of urgency. But the challenge for most companies is that they're making money. So when you're making money, there's a lot of pressure to not risk that revenue stream. And banks, of course, are a classic example of this. So it's really difficult for a leader to create this new kind of organization without, breaking what they have. So the work becomes hard. In a pitch, in the sales pitch, this is the point where I would say, and here's the magical answer, right? But we know the truth is there's no silver bullet. There's only hard work, right? There's no easy way to solve this. And the reason there's no easy way to solve this is that at its heart, this is really a complex adaptive system. Organizations are complex. And all of the work we're talking about, the kinds of change we want to make, we're framing it as technology, but the truth is it's based on a network of people who are making decisions. And there's a lot of decisions being made. And they're being made all over. And as we start to impact one part of the company, if we introduce a new technology, or if we say we're going to start offering APIs to the market as a product, or any of these things we want to do that we think will get us to the kind of company we want to become, there are unintended side effects that occur, right? In other words, we can't just sit down today and plan the 16 steps that will create the company of the future. It doesn't go that way in practice. If you're familiar with complexity at all, then you would have heard the name John Holland. I know very little about the actual mathematics and science of complex systems, but I love reading about it. The basic idea is important, right? And it kind of permeates a lot of what we do. And it's that if you take a group of agents like we have here, the people in an organization, their behaviors and decisions and the work they do creates an emergent output or an emergent behavior, kind of like a flock of birds flying. You could predict the behavior of an individual bird, but when you put them together, something weird happens where they all fly together as a group. What's fascinating to me is John Holland, was this expert, this pioneer in complex adaptive system science, identified that most of this comes down to the boundaries of the agents and the signals between them. And for me, that sounds a lot like what we talk about here, right, with APIs. In fact, I'd say that's what we're obsessed with, right? How do you define the boundaries of these APIs? And how do you define the signals, or as we would call them, the messages, right, that we pass in between them? I want to introduce another idea, which is the Keystone habit. There's this book Charles Duhigg wrote a few years back, and it's a fun, like, pop science book. And what Duhigg tells us is that if you're trying to change your habits, then if you can introduce the right new habit, like just a single new habit, it can unintentionally carry over into other parts of your life. So if you wanted to lose weight, maybe you get into the habit of maybe writing down what you eat, or your habit is you run every morning, and somehow that single habit has a knock-on effect of creating a whole bunch of other habits that gets you to the emergent output or emergent behavior that you want. And he doesn't just talk about people. In the book, he shares the story of an aluminum company. And this company was operating with a ton of inefficiencies, struggling in the market. And what the leader of that organization did is created a focus of improving their safety record. So he started instilling this habit of improving the safety of the company. And that habit, that idea that safety would matter, ended up having the knock-on effect of improving quality and speed and delivery across the entire organization. That's a keystone habit, right? So just like in archaeology or in building, the keystone habit is one that if you can instill it, you get all these good side effects, these good additional habits start to form, and you get to where you need to go. Now, I'll admit, having spent many years in the API space, I'm probably a little bit biased. And by no means am I saying that to create the kind of company I talked about before, that it's all APIs. But what I have found in the last 3 years of really digging into this with large companies is that focusing on these aspects of APIs, particularly the boundaries, the messages, and the structure, right? Really getting the habit of becoming good at optimizing that and thinking about it and designing it seems to lead to these other habits that get you to that type of organization you want to become, more so than I've seen with other areas. So for example, if you start focusing on boundaries and messages, you inevitably start thinking about service structure. Like how do I break it up? What are the service pieces that form my technology, right? If you start thinking of that, you inevitably start thinking about the organizational structure. How am I going to align to the business? And then you start thinking about how to actually support the work being done in those components. So you start thinking about shared services and platforms, and eventually, hopefully not too far in the future, start thinking about self-service options and automation and how to streamline that. If you start thinking about boundaries and messages, you inevitably start thinking about modularity as well, right? If I could break everything I do up into pieces, could I bring pieces from the outside in? Could I just focus on my core business and use other services to support it? If I break everything up into pieces, how do I deal with the data, right? And you start thinking about data architecture and optimizing that. And to get there, you end up getting the habit of aligning with the business strategy so that you can plug results back in and you start looking at opportunities outside of yourself. We have a few cases that we can point at that are almost the same cases we always trot out, right? But the Bezos story to me is an example of starting with a good habit around API thinking that eventually leads to a lot of impressive net results, including the formation of something like AWS. Now, again, on its own, you don't get all that just by doing APIs. But I truly believe that starting with good API habits can lead to a lot of the other good value. The problem is, how do you instill those kinds of habits, right? And the key, I think, is to bring in governance. So when we talk about governance in the continuous API management book, we're really talking about how to influence decisions at scale. So if it was just the 3 of us or the 5 of us or the 10 of us building some technology, then just through shared communication, we could probably come up with a nice structure and an API strategy and architecture that works. But at the scale of a large organization, that's harder. So to form these better habits, you need to influence the decisions that are being made at scale. In the book, we broke down decisions into these pieces, right? So largely, how do you research, how do you choose, and how do you execute the choices you make? The key thing to understand is when I'm talking about governance here, I'm not talking about API security or corporate governance or, how do you say no? Here we mean governance like governing, like government, like what's the method to ensure the sustainability of the organization, right? And that's what we're governing. So to me, that's what governance should be. And ideally, that's what you're striving for. In the places where I've seen it work, they're able to do a lot of things at the same time, right? So if you're in this position, if you're responsible for the success of API-enabled transformation, or if you're in an API governance team, these are the things I think you really need to be good at. Firstly, I think every team needs to be good at understanding the underlying theory and models of all this stuff. Do you know what good should look like? And do you understand the models that seem to be true, not just for APIs, but for technology, for civilization, right? For design. And I've listed a few examples of books that I find useful there. You'll notice only one of them is an API book, right? And I would classify this as private knowledge. Just like an API has its own implementation, this is your knowledge. It inspires your work, it shapes it, but you don't need to get your whole organization to understand any of this, right? This is for you to use. The second thing you've got to get really good at is building services and platforms. So how are you going to shape those journeys and decisions? What methods do you need? And here you start to create the platform that shapes decisions without you getting involved, right? This is your way of providing an invisible hand. And then finally, you need to get really good at execution. And this is sometimes the hard part, sometimes not, depending on your capability. But this is about you intervening and actually managing work that's happening. So you need to get really good at selling, at delivering solutions, enabling them, and even policing them. So put all that together and you see it's a wide range of capabilities. The companies that can do it well, I think inevitably are the ones that can really drive transformation with an API perspective. If all of that sounds interesting to you, by the way, and you're an expert in APIs, if you're interested in bringing those kinds of ideas to life, I mentioned there's a global talent shortage. I'm looking for people, so let me know if you're interested. Thank you.